Hi again, Pre-K. We're going to do our next couple of pages of Benjamin's box and see if we can't guess what's in those eggs again today. This page is called The Thorn, and you can see Jesus looks pretty bad there. He's been whipped and beaten and spat at and called names and just really tortured. And so the story goes like this. Benjamin continued to walk. If only he could make them release Jesus, but what could a small boy do? He heard loud cries as another crowd gathered at the end of the street. "Hail, King of the Jews!" yelled a soldier as Benjamin pushed his way past men and women. And there stood Jesus. Benjamin looked into Jesus' eyes as Roman soldiers threw a shabby robe over his beaten back. He expected to see hatred, but instead saw only love. Just then a soldier shoved a crown of thorns on Jesus' head, and another struck him with a stick. Benjamin's eyes filled with tears. Why were they doing this? A few days ago, everyone had called Jesus a king when he entered Jerusalem. Now it seemed they all hated him. Benjamin squatted down and buried his head in his hands. "Please, God," he prayed over and over, "please make them stop." When he finally opened his eyes, the crowd had moved along. Jesus was gone, and he walked over to where they had scorned his friend and picked up a sharp thorn broken from the awful crown. Then he ran home. His parents paused to hear his story, then sadly shook their heads and returned to their work. Benjamin placed the thorn and leather strip in his box and cried. And so you see Benjamin there with Jesus, and he just feels so sad about what's happening. So what do you think might be inside this egg that goes with this page? I'll let you hear it. Hear that? You can maybe see through there too a little bit. So I'll open it, and inside there is actually the crown of thorns that they put on Jesus' head. And when they did the crown of thorns, they didn't just place it on his head. They took it and they shoved it down so it would cut his head. And the intent was to make it hurt really bad. And they were just so unkind and so mean. But we all know why. We all know what's coming. That on Good Friday, Jesus is killed. And then, of course, the happy part on Easter Sunday, he rises from the dead and opens heaven. That's how heaven got started. So that's that little crown of thorns. These are just plastic, but at Jesus' time, they were, of course, big and sticky outy and very, very painful. So then the next part of the story goes like this. This one is called The Nail. The Nail. "Benjamin," cried Eli, "have you heard? Jesus is going to be crucified." "No," cried Benjamin, "he has done nothing to deserve that." Eli frowned. "My father says the only worst criminals are put to death on a cross." So they were calling Jesus just the worst criminal because they claimed he called himself the Son of God. Benjamin went outside and sat in a dark corner of his house. He did not want to talk or even to think about this sad news, but in his mind, he could still see evil men hurting Jesus. "I must go," finally he said aloud. "If this is partly my fault, I can at least be there. I can pray for him." "Where are you going?" asked his mother as she opened the door. "To help a friend," he said. She nodded and touched his cheek. As Benjamin climbed the hill, he found a large spike. It was like those used by Romans to nail criminals to crosses. He tucked it in his tunic and continued on. 3 crosses stood at the top of the hill. But he could not force his eyes to look upon his friend. He noticed a small group of people apart from the larger crowd. He knew they were Jesus' dearest friends. He sat near them and bowed to pray. But the only words that came out were, "I'm sorry, God. I'm so sorry." So Benjamin feels a little bit guilty because remember back earlier in the story, he had that incident with Judas, and so he felt bad about that. So what do you think is in the next egg that goes with the story? This one sounds pretty heavy. Feels heavy too when I shake it. I'll show you what's in here. So it's actually 3 nails that have been put together to look like a cross. So you see 1 nail here, 1 nail here, and then this is another nail. And it's really metal. It really is made out of metal, just like the nails that Jesus had put in his hands and in his feet. And that sounds so incredibly painful, and it was, especially to be hanging there for 3 hours like Jesus did. So that was what was in the next egg. So I hope you're remembering that this is still Holy Week and that tomorrow is Good Friday. Today actually is Holy Thursday. Today is the day, if we were allowed to go to church. We can't because of the little coronavirus that's going around, but if we were allowed to go to church, we would see the priests washing people's feet, like at the Last Supper. Jesus did that. He washed his friends' feet, and he did that to show that he didn't have pride, that he was humble. He was humble enough of a leader to do something like washing somebody else's feet, which is kind of humiliating and icky, right? But he did it. He wanted to show how humble he was and what a sweet person he was. So I'll see you next time for the rest of the book on Friday. We'll get to see the end of Benjamin's box. Okay? All right. See you later.